Statistics Canada says that Canada's inflation rate tumbled to 2.8% in June, putting it within the Bank of Canada's target range. The federal agency says that the deceleration was broad-based. The lower gasoline prices compared with last year led the slowdown. But Canadians aren't seeing any relief at grocery stores yet. This comes as prices rose 9.1% year over year, which is slightly faster than in May. The Bank of Canada's rate hikes are also feeding into higher inflation through mortgage interest costs. The federal agency says that excluding mortgage interest costs, inflation would have risen to 2% year over year. The central bank raised interest rates earlier this month, in part because of concerns that inflation would stay high for longer. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Dr. Moshe Lander, economist and professor at Concordia University. Dr. Lander, always great having you.
Hello.
So let's start with this. Why are we seeing such a big disparity between overall inflation and food inflation, Dr. Lander?
Yeah, so inflation, remember, is an increase in the average price of a basket of goods and services that the typical consumer buys. So when we say that it's the average, that means that there's a lot of things in that basket that might be rising more, some are rising less, some might be outright falling. And so unfortunately for Canadians, the big headline items that are rising quickly are the things that we see the most, groceries and rent or mortgage. And the things that are falling the most are also things that we see a lot, which is gasoline prices. So where normally these things might be in the middle of the distribution, it just seems that they're at the outer tips in this case. And so it's really making eyebrows raise.
Definitely. Now, Dr. Lander, meanwhile, it seems that mortgage interest costs are actually feeding into inflation. So can you walk us through this, considering that rising interest rates are meant to slow inflation?
Yeah, so again, it's just part of the basket, right? All of us need rent or mortgage as part of our housing cost. And so when interest rates go from record lows to 20-year highs, anybody who has to reset their mortgage, you could have been getting a fixed rate mortgage as low as 1.7% a few years ago. Now that's probably over 5, maybe even at 6%. So of course, it's going to show up in the figures. The good news is that as interest rates remain at this level for an extended period, we'd be talking in 12 months about how inflation is leveled off because the cost of housing hasn't risen as much.
So do you think the Bank of Canada should maybe rethink its interest rate strategy, considering the impact of mortgage interest rates on overall inflation right now?
No. So the Bank of Canada needs to keep inflation at 2. And you did say in the intro there that they're now in their target range, but they're in their target range right now. And that doesn't mean they're going to be there next month or in 6 months. And so once they're convinced that interest rate or inflation is steadily in that 2% range, the way it used to be a couple of years ago, then the Bank of Canada might look at actually decreasing interest rates. The long-term rate is probably somewhere around 4.5% to 5%. So there's room for them to cut interest rates, but they need to know that inflation is firmly anchored in that 1% to 3%. 1 month's data doesn't mean that's true.
And taking a look at current trends, how likely are we to see another interest rate hike in the near future or a pause? What are your thoughts on that?
So the next meeting is in September. So the only thing that's going to happen between now and then is we'll get another jobs report and we'll see another picture of GDP. If the economy continues to grow faster than expected and if more jobs than expected are being created, then they might decide to bump up interest rates. But I don't really think that that's going to happen in September. I think they might want to wait for another set of inflation data and see what's happening before they decide what to do with interest rates. That next meeting then would be in October. And so I think we've got a couple of months here where we can ride out where we currently are.
And on the topic of inflation readings, it seems that inflation was lowered primarily because of one-off price reductions in gasoline prices and a reduction in price for telecommunication services like the internet and cell phone services. So does this mean that inflation is likely to creep back up if these factors increase in price?
It's possible, but we can start playing those games, Nima, with almost anything that's within the basket, right? So if you take out gasoline, for example, inflation was 4%. But if you take out food and you take out mortgage costs, inflation was only 2%. So that's the thing with averages. It's the same way that if we drop the best student in the class, the average comes down. If we drop the worst student, the average goes up. We still include them in the average because they're part of the class. This is part of the basket. And so what it's suggesting is that the overall basket isn't rising as quickly. But again, there's great disparity within the numbers.
All right, a quick 30 seconds left here, Dr. Lander. But in terms of these sky-high grocery prices, can Canadians expect any relief in the near future?
Probably not. The thing is that all we could expect is that prices will not rise as fast. but it's unlikely that prices are going to fall. The broader issue here, something we can talk about another time, is a lack of competition within the entire food supply chain, going all the way back to the farm itself. And so when you lack competition, that gives everybody along that chain the ability to increase prices, and we pay more than we otherwise have to because of that lack of competition.
Lots to consider. Dr. Lander, thank you again for your time today.
Anytime.